How's everybody doing? Good to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Let's light up the darkness. I apologize for being a few minutes late. We actually have to go to a function immediately after class, and I got a little confused getting ready and getting prepared. But here we are, thank God. Bill in Mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Guy in Ohio, Shandor in the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Yitzhak in Minnesota, Paula in Chicago, Joseph in Massachusetts, Frank in San Pedro, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. This is our second to last page of our tractate and of order Seder Nashim. So with God's help, we're going to be making a siyum tomorrow on Tractate Kiddushin, on Seder Nashim, and we'll open Bava Kama and the next of the fourth of the six orders, the six Sedarim of the Talmud, which is Seder Nazikim. Our daf tonight is page 81. We're going to pick it up at the bottom of page 80b, and we're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 8, which is talking about, now that we're in the context of betrothal, etc., where do we have to be cautious about seclusion, right? That if a man and woman who are not married end up secluded together, they're going to have an opportunity, to have extramarital sex, which is a transgression, or other kinds of prohibited sex might, not just, in other words, not the actual, the nature of the physical act, but just the fact that there might be other prohibitions between them, not just that they're not married to each other. It might be incestuous. It might be that she's married and it would be adultery, all kinds of problems. So they shouldn't even be secluded. But that we have less suspicion that something might ensue in some cases than in others, right? I mean, for example, we don't care if, a man and his mom or a man and his daughter are secluded because there's nothing going to happen there. There's no reason to be suspicious of such people. But other cases, where we fear that a couple of two people might succumb to their evil inclination, we are going to be much more cautious, and so as a matter of a rabbinic decree, so that they shouldn't have that opportunity to engage in that fornication, as it were, they shouldn't even be secluded, and if they are secluded, they violate a rabbinic decree, and they would be subject to flogging for that. So we pick it up at the bottom of page 80b. The Mishnah teaches, but one woman may be secluded with two men. In other words, we saw yesterday that there's a distinction that we don't allow one man to be secluded with two women because something definitely is more, because it's more likely that a sin could happen under those conditions. But we're less concerned if one woman is secluded with two men. And why is that? Rav Yehuda says that Rav says they taught this law only with regard to men of fit morals, right? That men of fit morals, they're going to be aware if one or the other makes this transgression, and men are more likely, we learned yesterday, to rat each other out for committing transgressions, so nothing is likely to happen here. But this is with regard to men of fit morals. But with regard to men who are steeped in sexual immorality, she may not be secluded even with 10 such men, because who knows what's going to happen there. These guys might not stop themselves just because there's other men around, who would remind them not to do the deed or who would, publicize the matter if it happened. There was an incident where 10 men carried out a woman on a bier as though she were dead, and they engaged in intercourse with her. Rav Yosef says, no, that this is so, since 10 people will join together and steal a heavy beam without being ashamed before one another. And similarly, several men can join together for a licentious act without shame, right? Beware actual conspiracies, people getting together, and once, it's almost like that mob mentality. It's a little bit of somebody who would not, commit theft in the normal course of things, but he's surrounded by people who are stealing and they normalize it. then he might commit theft, and likewise with sexual immorality. Now the Gemara suggests, shall we say, the following Mishnah from Sota, page 7a, supports Rav Yosef. It was taught with regard to one who is bringing his wife, whom he suspects of having committed adultery, to the temple to perform the ritual of the bitter water. Right? We learned the ritual of the suspected adulteress in Tractate Sota. So the husband warned her not to seclude herself with some man that she was, she had attracted some suspicion that she might be committing adultery. So the husband warned her, do not seclude yourself with that man. And then witnesses saw that she did seclude herself with that man. No one saw whether the wife and her paramour did anything behind closed doors, but they were secluded together because of the warning and because the seclusion was witnessed. Now she becomes prohibited to her husband, and they're going to have to divorce unless the temple is standing and they can go to Jerusalem and she goes through the ritual of drinking the bitter water. And if she's innocent, she'll be fine. But until that moment, the husband and wife remain prohibited to each other. They can no longer be together as man and wife physically. Under those circumstances, they need chaperones during this journey to Jerusalem. Because if they violate the terms of this law, this halacha, and they are physically intimate, then the ritual of the bitter water will not work. Right, so they're going to have to be escorted down to Jerusalem. Right, so in the case of a husband and wife who are journeying to Jerusalem to perform the ritual of the bitter water at the Holy Temple, they provide the couple with two Torah scholars to accompany them, lest he engage in sexual intercourse with his wife along the way. As until the ritual has been performed, she remains forbidden to her husband. And it can be inferred from here, two Torah scholars, yes, their presence will assure that no one will engage in forbidden intercourse. Regular men, right, if you had two chaperones who were not Torah scholars, that would not be a guarantee of anything that this couple will be prevented because they'll be embarrassed or because they'll be reminded not to do that because they are not permitted to each other until she drinks the bitter water. So regular men, no. There is still a concern that the couple may engage in intercourse, and this indicates that ordinary people are not relied upon with regard to seclusion with a woman. But the Gemara rejects this proof. The reason there, in the case of the Sota, is a need for the men to be Torah scholars. The reason there that there is a need for the two chaperones to be Torah scholars is that Torah scholars are different in that they know how to warn him not to engage in intercourse with her, since that would neutralize the effectiveness of the examination of the waters. But in terms of preventing them from having intercourse, they didn't need to be Torah scholars according to this second version of the argument. Now we're on page 81a. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the sages taught that two men may seclude themselves with one woman only in a city where others are present. But on the road, it is not permitted unless there are three. Why are two men insufficient on the road? Perhaps one of them will need to urinate and will walk away, and it will turn out that one man will be secluded with one woman who is forbidden to him. The Gemara suggests, shall we say, the Mishna quoted above supports this view. They provide the husband of the Sota with two Torah scholars to accompany them, lest he engage in sexual intercourse with her along the way. He and two Torah scholars are three, which indicates that there is a requirement for three men when they are traveling. But the Gemara answers this is no proof of the principle that you need three men, as there, in the case of the Sota, there is a requirement for an additional two men in order that they should serve as witnesses about him, to testify whether or not he engaged in intercourse with her along the way, which is yet another reason why you need two men accompanying the husband and the Sota. Now, the Gemara relates, Rav and Rav Yehuda were walking along the way, and a certain woman was walking ahead of them. And Rav said to Rav Yehuda, raise your feet and walk quickly, away from Gehenna, so that we do not remain secluded with her. in other words, he's saying if we are not, it's almost like they're approaching a place in the road, where the two of them and this woman are going to end up secluded together. And now we have not just two men and a woman, which normally is permitted because we're not worried that anything's going to happen. But we said in the city, we're not worried. Out on the road, something could happen. Here we're also talking about two Torah scholars. I mean, really, is there a risk that in a situation where a Torah scholar ends up secluded with some woman that he's actually going to become so overcome with lust and she's going to be so into him that he's going to give in and they're going to have sex? I mean, really, do we need to be concerned about that? But Rav says to Rav Yehuda, yeah, pick it up. We don't want to end up secluded with her. And Rav Yehuda said to him, well, but wasn't it you, Master, who said that it is permitted in the case of men of fit morals? We're Torah scholars, right? Are we really concerned about us? And Rav said to Rav Yehuda, who says that I referred to men of fit morals such as you and me? And Rav Yehuda responded, well, rather than such as whom, if we're not fit? And Rav answered, such as Rabbi Hanina Bar Papi and his colleagues, who have proven that they can withstand temptation, as we learned on page 39b. All other people are not trusted in this matter, even if they're prominent Torah scholars. And Rav says, the court flogs a man due to his being secluded with a woman. But a wife is not forbidden to her husband, and an unmarried woman is not prohibited from marrying a priest due to being secluded, as it cannot be stated definitively that the secluded pair engage in sexual intercourse, right? In other words, adultery, if a married woman commits adultery, she becomes prohibited to her husband and they have to divorce. Even if the husband forgives her, he can't take her back. Maybe they can remarry, I'm not sure, but for sure they need to divorce, right? But that's because they're guilty of the written Torah violation, transgression of adultery. If this married woman secludes herself with some other man, and it's witnessed that they were secluded and without the warning, so she doesn't become a sota, so then she could be flogged for that. Both her and the man who allowed this seclusion to occur could be flogged for that. But she doesn't become prohibited to her husband. And even in the case of a woman who was secluded with a man, we might have thought, okay, well, just in terms of a regular husband, okay, but maybe she's going to become prohibited to marry a priest. And the answer is no. There's no proof that something happened while she was secluded. She only violated a rabbinic decree, which was a fence around the Torah to help protect her from ever committing adultery. But she's not going to become prohibited to her husband or even prohibited to marry a priest due to being secluded, even though seclusion itself is a flogging offense because it violates a rabbinic decree. Now, Rav Ashi said, we stated the law that one is flogged due to being secluded only with an unmarried woman, but for being secluded with a married woman, one is not flogged. Why not? It is so that there should not be rumors spread concerning her children. Is that interesting? So a man who secludes himself with a woman who's not his wife, the seclusion is a flogging offense. With a married woman, if he actually slept with her, it's even worse because that would be adultery. But the seclusion itself is not a flogging offense. And that's completely because of a policy consideration, which is that if a man and a woman, and they're not, she's married to someone else, and they were secluded together, in circumstances that would lead to suspicion, and so that normally would be a flogging offense. But if they were flogged for that, a flogging definitely generates publicity, and because she's married and has children, it might cast suspicions on her children that in fact maybe they're momsers, maybe their father is not their father. And to preclude that from happening, we don't flog a married woman. A rabbinic court would not flog a married woman who secluded herself with a man, though they might flog a single woman who secluded herself with a man. Both the man and the woman in that case, right? They're both guilty of the transgression. Where am I? Now, Rav says, the court flogs one due to his being the subject of a bad rumor, meaning that not only is a person flogged when the facts have been ascertained, But even when he has only reportedly committed transgressions, he may be flogged. Right now, we were like, what? We're actually going to allow corporal punishment when the facts have not been proven by the testimony of witnesses? Really? As it is stated, 1 Samuel 2:24, "Know, my sons, for it is no good report when Mar Zutra would flog a person for being the subject of a bad rumor. He would place the bridle of a donkey on the person's shoulders and recite before him when administering lashes this quote, this verse, 'Know, my sons, for it is no good report,' so that people would know why he was being flogged, that this person is the subject of bad rumor." Now, right away, our hackles are up. And we say, are you kidding me? Let's say that somebody dislikes you, for whatever reason, they got angry with you at work, and they decide to spread a vicious rumor about you. And now because there's a rumor about you that is not true, that is pure slander, you could end up getting brought before a court and flogged because you're the subject of the rumor? Really? Well, it's not so simple. The law is like this. If there is a persistent rumor that a person is engaging in forbidden intercourse, and this person does not have enemies who may be circulating false rumors about him, then the court has the right to flog him or to insult, demean, or excommunicate him. What we're talking about is not the rumor mill, but let's call it the truth mill of a village, right? Over time, everyone in the village knows what's going on. And so even though there might not be specific witnesses to the seclusion, at least not witnesses that are going to come forward and really establish the matter in court, over time, people know what's going on. And if over time it becomes established that, somebody is a wanton sinner, well, that reflects badly on the whole community, and the court could take action. It's not that they definitely will, not necessarily that they're mandatory that they will, but they can. Okay. Now, Rabbah says, if a woman's husband is in town, there is no concern due to her being secluded with a man. People are afraid to sin with her since they cannot be sure when her husband will return. Rav Yosef says, if there is an open entrance to the public domain, there is no concern due to being secluded. And the Gemara relates, Rav Bevai arrived at Rav Yosef's house, and after he wrapped his bread, meaning he ate his meal, he said to the members of the household, please remove the ladder from beneath Bevai, who was going to sleep in the upper story, so that he not be able to climb down due to the prohibition of being secluded with Rav Yosef's wife. He didn't want anybody to even have the remotest suspicion that he could be guilty of something, avoiding all appearance of impropriety. So he said, listen, I'm going to go sleep in the attic. Just take the ladder away. I don't need to come out during the night. In the morning, put the ladder back up. And then no one can even be suspicious of me, that I was secluded in the same house with Rav Yosef's wife while I'm here visiting. Now the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rabbah say that if her husband is in town, there is no concern due to her being secluded with a man? And the Gemara answers, well, Rav Bevai is different, since Rav Yosef's wife was his friend and she was familiar with him. And therefore, there was more cause for concern, right? That's how stories get started in a village. Now, Rav Kahana says, if the men are located on the outside, meaning in the outer room, and the women are on the inside, meaning in an inner room, then there's no concern due to being secluded. Even if one of the men were to enter the inner room, he would be seen by the other men. By contrast, if there were men in the inner room and women in the outer room, then there is a concern due to being secluded, since one of the men can claim that he is just leaving when in fact he's going to join the women. Now the Gemara comments the opposite was taught in a Baraisa, that if the men are on the outside and the women are on the inside, there is concern due to being secluded, as one of the men might venture inside without being noticed, but if the men are inside and the women are outside, he knows that one of the other men might go out through the women's quarters at any time, and therefore there is no concern due to being secluded. Right? You see the general feeling that they're building, which is, look, avoid any situation where you're going to have the opportunity to sin. Don't put yourself in that position, because if he's willing and she's willing, nothing's going to stop their evil inclinations from, creating that sin. So don't put yourself in that situation. Abaye said, now that Rav Kahana has said the law in this manner, and a Baraisa teaches the opposite, we shall act stringently in both cases. Abaye would arrange rows of pitchers between the men and women so that they would not be able to cross from one area to the other without making noise. Rava would arrange rows of reeds to prevent passage. Avin said, the wound of the year is the festival. Meaning, no matter how pious people are, and even though they're going up to Jerusalem, when the temple was standing and they would go up to Jerusalem to celebrate a festival, they're going for such a pious reason. Nevertheless, Jerusalem was packed with people everywhere, people celebrating, people drinking a lot of wine. That's a fertile breeding ground for all kinds of problematic behavior. Now, the Gemara relates, those captive women who were brought to Nehardea, where they were redeemed, were brought up to the house of Rav Amram the pious. And they removed the ladder from before them to prevent men from climbing up after them to the attic where they were sleeping. When one of them passed by the entrance to the upper chamber, it was as though a light shone in the aperture due to her great beauty. And out of his great desire for her, Rav Amram, known as Rav Amram the pious, grabbed a ladder that 10 men together could not lift, and he lifted it on his own and began climbing. See how great the evil inclination is, even within one who is known for his piety. And not as a hypocrite. I mean, he really was a pious man, but in certain situations, you just can't trust yourself. When he was halfway up the ladder, he strengthened his legs against the sides of the ladder to stop himself from climbing further. And he raised his voice and he cried out, "There is a fire in the house of Amram." Now, upon hearing this, the sages came running, and they found him in that position. They said to him, "You have embarrassed us, since everyone sees what you had intended to do, that you're a Torah scholar who was on his way up to have some kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a rendezvous, but an encounter with these women, these captive women who are being redeemed, and they're only here temporarily. But, in this situation, your lust has overcome you, and you're going to try and go up there and see what you could make happen. Now, you stopped yourself. Well done. But by screaming fire and making everybody run, now everybody knows that one of the sages was nearly overcome with lust. You should have just kept your mouth shut. Good that you stopped yourself, and you should have kept your mouth shut. Rav Amram said to them, "It is better that you be shamed in Amram's house in this world and not be ashamed of him in the world to come." Right? Okay, I'm embarrassed, you're embarrassed, but I didn't do the transgression. And I felt that in order to stop the transgression from happening, I needed to shout out in that way. And it's better that I did that. And he took an oath that the evil inclination should emerge from him. And then, now because he had come so close to sinning, he took this extra measure and he took an oath, very interesting, that his evil inclination should emerge from him. And an apparition similar to a pillar of fire emerged from him. And he spoke to his evil inclination and he said, "See, as you are fire and I am mere flesh, and yet I am still superior to you. I was able to overcome you." Right? So whether this, happened literally or it's a little bit more figurative, he had a conversation with his evil inclination. I mean, he respects his evil inclination in the sense that he doesn't underestimate the power of his evil inclination. not a bad idea, to speak to your evil inclination and say, you're not going to defeat me. I know how wily you are. I know that you're going to suggest to me ways in which I could be a even more virtuous person by doing such and such, which would just happen to put me in the proximity of a place where I might be overcome by my lust. But I know how wily you are, my evil inclination. I'm not going to succumb to that. Now, the Gemara relates another incident. Rabbi Meir, the great Rabbi Meir, whenever we encounter a anonymous Mishna, a Mishna authored anonymously, it's usually Rabbi Meir, so he's that prominent of a sage. Rabbi Meir would ridicule transgressors by saying it's easy to avoid temptation. What's the matter with you people that you give into temptation? Don't you understand that all you have to do is say no here during your short mortal life, and what you gain for yourself is immortal, eternal life, right? And a much higher place in the world of souls. Why would you make such a bad exchange, such a bad deal as to give into your evil inclination? He was saying it's easy to overcome your evil inclination. So what happened to Rabbi Meir? One day, the Satan, right? The Satan, as we've talked about many times, Satan, the Satan, it's not some kind of independent devil. The Satan is the prosecutor angel. He works for God, but he opposes humans, right? And his job is to tempt and entrap the humans and make the case before the judge of the world that, hey, these humans are sinners and they deserve every punishment that you can level at them. See how often they let you down, right? The Satan is not our friend, that's for sure. He's the prosecutor. So now that Rabbi Meir said it's easy to overcome the evil inclination, okay, well, he attracted the eye of the Satan, as it were, and the Satan appeared to him in the form of a woman standing on the other side of the river. Since there was no ferry to cross the river, he took hold of a rope bridge and crossed the river. And when he reached halfway across the rope bridge, the evil inclination left him and said to him, were it not for the fact that they proclaim about you in heaven, be careful with regard to Rabbi Meir and his Torah, I would have made your blood like tumah, meaning completely worthless, since you would have fallen completely from your spiritual level. Right? In other words, the Satan desisted from this temptation and allowed the evil inclination to pass out of Rabbi Meir, but only because heaven had said, listen, don't, hey, Satan, don't ply your entrapments too much with Rabbi Meir. We need him to stay busy writing all this beautiful Torah that he writes. Go entrap someone else. And it was only because of that instruction that he received in heaven that the Satan didn't persist, because had he persisted, even the great Rabbi Meir would have fallen, right? And that's Rabbi Meir relating the story. This is to tell you that, you think that the evil inclination is something that doesn't apply to you, that's easy to conquer. Even the great Rabbi Meir would have fallen. He didn't, but he would have. So let that be a warning to us who are much, of a much lower spiritual level and therefore much more prone to, fall victim to the evil inclination, as it were. Rabbi Akiva would likewise ridicule transgressors. The great Rabbi Akiva. One day, the Satan appeared to him as a woman at the top of a palm tree. And Rabbi Akiva grabbed hold of the palm tree and began climbing. And when he was halfway up the palm tree, the evil inclination left him and said to him, were it not for the fact that they proclaim about you in heaven, be careful with regard to Rabbi Akiva and his Torah, I would have made your blood like tumah, right? I would have made you worthless as a Torah scholar. You would have just been a former Torah scholar who succumbed to his evil inclination. And another story, the sage Palemu had the habit to say every day, an arrow in the eye of Satan, mocking the temptations of the evil inclination, right? Same idea. So one day, it was the eve of Yom Kippur, and Satan appeared to him as a pauper who came and called him to the door requesting charity. Palemu brought out bread for him. Satan said to him, on a day like today, when everyone is inside eating, right? It's Erev Yom Kippur, right? The day before Yom Kippur. Remember that on the day before Yom Kippur, it's as big a mitzvah to eat a good meal as it is to fast on Yom Kippur. We learned that in Tractate Yom. So, now it's Erev Yom Kippur. Palemo brings some bread out to this beggar at the door, which is really Satan disguised as a beggar. And Satan says to him, on a day like today, everybody's inside eating, and I shall stand outside and eat. So Palemo brought him inside and gave him more bread. And Satan said to him, on a day like today, everyone is sitting at the table, and I should sit by myself? Okay, so they brought him and sat him at the table. He was sitting, and he had covered himself with boils and pus, and he was doing repulsive things at the table. So Palemo said to the pauper, now we're in 81b, sit properly and do not act in a revolting manner. And Satan then said to him, give me a cup. And they gave him a cup. And he coughed up his phlegm and he spat into the cup. So they berated him for acting this way, at which point Satan pretended to sink down and die. And they heard people around them saying, Palemo killed a man. Palemo killed a man. Palemo fled and hid himself in the bathroom. Satan followed him and fell before him. Upon seeing that Palemo was suffering, he revealed himself as Satan to him. And Satan said to him, what is the reason that you spoke this way, provoking me, by saying an arrow in the eye of Satan? And Palemo replied, but what then should I say? And Satan said to him, let the master, meaning Palemo, say, let the merciful one rebuke the Satan. Right? So the lesson is, it was a little bit complicated what was going on there, but suffice to say that Satan made Palemo look bad in that whole affair. And he did that because Palemo had run around chanting an arrow in the eye of Satan. So what we're learning is don't underestimate your evil inclination. Don't underestimate the power of the Satan to entrap you and lead you down a path that results in you committing grave sins. Everyone is susceptible to that. No one is above it. And so if you want to make sure that you're defeating the evil inclination, that you're defeating the Satan, always pray for help to do that. Please, God, help me defeat the Satan. Please, God, help me defeat my evil inclination. The Gemara relates, Rabbi Chia bar Ashi was accustomed to say, whenever he would fall on his face in prayer, may the merciful one save us from the evil inclination. One day his wife heard him saying this prayer, and she said, after all, it has been several years since he has withdrawn from engaging in intercourse with me due to his advanced years. What is the reason that he says this prayer? Right? She hears him praying, let me not fall into the temptation of the evil inclination. And she's thinking he's so old, we haven't had sex in a long time. He doesn't even have that urge. Why is he continuing to say this prayer? Is it that he doesn't have an urge for me? Is that what's going on? But he's exercising that urge somewhere else? Now her curiosity is piqued, shall we say. So one day, while Rabbi Chia bar Ashi was studying in his garden, his wife adorned herself and repeatedly walked past him. In other words, she disguised herself as a very sexy prostitute and kept walking down the road past him in the garden. And he said, who are you? And she said, I am Charuta. And Charuta was the name of a very well-known prostitute. And she says, I am Charuta, returning from my day at work. And he was so overcome with lust, it's his wife, but now that she's all, gussied up, he propositioned her. And she said to him, give me that pomegranate from the top of the tree as payment. He leapt up, climbed the tree, and brought the pomegranate from the top. And then they engaged in intercourse, right? Obviously, her face is masked. When he came home, his wife was lighting the fire in the oven. He went and sat inside the oven. Some say put his feet in the oven. The point is he's overcome with guilt over what he just did. And he wants to, punish himself. He's not going to commit suicide. He's a sage. But he wanted to singe himself or burn himself or somehow, he wants to punish himself. And she said, "What's going on with you?" And he said to her, "Well, such and such an incident occurred." He confessed immediately the whole thing that happened. And he told her that he had engaged in intercourse with a prostitute. And she said to him, "Don't worry about it. That wasn't some prostitute. That was me. You had sex with your wife." He paid no attention to her, thinking she was merely trying to comfort him, until she gave him signs that it was indeed her. And he said to her, "Well, doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. I thought I was sleeping with a prostitute. I committed the sin. I intended to transgress." And the Gemara relates all the days of that righteous man, he would fast for the transgression he intended to commit until he died by that death in his memory. He never overcame his guilt. I mean, he's a very lofty spiritual person. And he never overcame his guilt over the transgression that he thought he committed, when in fact he didn't even really commit a sin, because he only slept with his wife. This would seem to indicate he was old and never interested in having sex with her, but he was obviously able to not only do it, but climb a tree before doing it. And she, was able to really tempt him by dressing up in this way. Okay, well, it sounds like normally in the normal course of things, she wasn't, engaging in that flirtatious behavior behind closed doors in their house. Maybe the two of them should have scheduled more date nights to make sure that physical intimacy did not become something that became, all too rare as they, grew older in the later phase of their married life together. Now, the Gemara explains the source that one who intended to transgress is punished even though he did not actually sin, right? Maybe you didn't commit a sin, but if you thought you were committing a sin, there is accountability for that. As it is taught in a baraisa concerning a husband who nullified the vow of his wife. Her husband has made them null, and the Lord will forgive her. Meaning, let's say that a woman took a vow to be a Nazir, right, to abstain from wine and all grape products, and a husband can nullify a wife's vow for her on the day that he hears of it. So she took this vow. Maybe she was, a little hot-headed and didn't realize what would be entailed in taking such a vow. Okay, her husband heard about it, nullified it right away. But she didn't know that the husband had nullified it. If she then goes and drinks wine, what happens? She didn't violate her Naziris because her husband nullified her vow. But she didn't know that her vow had been nullified. So from her perspective, she committed a sin. She committed a transgression. What result? With regard to what case is this verse speaking, why would the woman require forgiveness if her husband has nullified her vow? It is referring to a woman who vowed to be a Nazir, and her husband heard and nullified her vow. And she did not know that her husband had nullified her vow, and she drank wine, and she contracted impurity from a corpse, which is also prohibited for a Nazir. So she violated the vow that she thought she had taken because she didn't know it had been nullified. So she does require forgiveness for that. Maybe less than if she actually violated the prohibition, but still, it is some kind of a transgression. And the Gemara relates, when Rabbi Akiva came to this verse, he would cry. And he said, and if with regard to one who intended to eat pork and kosher lamb actually came up in his hand, like this woman who intended to violate her vow, but in fact did not because her husband had nullified it, and the Torah nevertheless says she requires atonement and forgiveness, well, then all the more so one who intended to commit a sin and actually did commit a sin, how much atonement and forgiveness they require compared to one who didn't even really commit the sin but thought he did. In a similar manner, you can say that the same lesson can be derived from the verse, Leviticus 5:17, though he know it not, yet he is guilty and shall bear his iniquity. And when Rabbi Akiva came to this verse, he would cry, and he said, and if with regard to one who intended to eat permitted fat and forbidden fat mistakenly came up in his hand, and the Torah states, though he knew it not, yet is he guilty and shall bear his iniquity, then all the more so is this true of someone who intended to eat forbidden fat and did in fact eat forbidden fat. Isi ben Yehuda says with regard to the verse, though he know it not, yet is he guilty and shall bear his iniquity. With regard to this matter, all sufferers should grieve, since the verse teaches that one is punished even for sins that he did not know he committed. Right? Sometimes we commit a sin and we didn't even know we did it, but we're held accountable for that. Now the Mishnah teaches that a man may be secluded with his mother. Meaning we're not suspicious of a man coming to, sin with his mother. Rav Yehuda says that Rav Asi says a man may be secluded with his sister and live with his mother or with his daughter in a permanent arrangement, and we are not concerned. When he said this before Shmuel, Shmuel said, actually it is prohibited to be secluded with all those with whom relations are forbidden by the Torah, and even with an animal, as it is prohibited to engage in intercourse with an animal as well. Just avoid being secluded with anyone who is prohibited to you. Now we learned in the Mishnah, a man may be secluded with his mother and with his daughter and sleep alongside them with bodily contact. And this appears to be a conclusive refutation of the statement of Shmuel. We're not concerned that these people will, just because they're secluded together, will end up committing a sin. But the Gemara answers, well, Shmuel could have said to you, and according to your reasoning, how should one explain that which is taught in a Baraisa with regard to his sister and his mother-in-law and all those with whom relations are forbidden, including his mother and his daughter? One may be secluded with them only in the presence of witnesses, from which it can be inferred, okay, in the presence of witnesses, yes, but without the presence of witnesses, no. So this Baraisa supports the opinion of Shmuel that one may not be secluded with his mother or sister. Rather, it is a dispute between Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, as to whether one may be secluded with his mother or sister. As it is taught in the Baraisa, Rabbi Meir said, be careful with me because of my daughter, meaning make sure I am not left secluded with her. And similarly, Rabbi Tarfon said, be careful with me because of my daughter-in-law. A certain student mocked him for being wary of the possibility of sinning with his daughter-in-law. Like, obviously that's not going to happen. Why are you being so overly cautious? And Rabbi Abahu said, in the name of Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, not many days passed until that student who mocked his teacher ended up committing that sin with his own mother-in-law. And the Gemara stated, I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara stated that according to Shmuel, it is prohibited for one to be alone, even with an animal. And the Gemara relates, Abaye removed the animals from the entire field that he was in. Rav Sheshes transferred the animals to the other side of the fence. Rav Hanan from Nehardea happened to come to Rav Kahana in Pum Nahara. And he said that he was sitting and studying, and an animal was standing before him. And Rav Hanan said to him, doesn't the master hold that one may not be secluded even with an animal? And Rav Kahana said to him, did not even enter my mind that an animal was in the room with me. I didn't even notice. But if he had noticed, he would have cleared the animal out of there. You just don't even with it, it's ridiculous, and we know nothing's going to happen. Don't seclude yourself. Rava says a man may be secluded with two sisters-in-law and with two rival wives, i.e. two women who share a husband, with a woman and her mother-in-law, and with a woman and her husband's daughter. Since these women typically dislike each other, each fears that the other will publicize her sins, and they will be careful not to transgress. And similarly, a man may be secluded with a woman and a girl who knows the meaning of sexual intercourse, i.e. one who is old enough to understand the nature of intercourse, but is still young enough that she does not submit herself to intercourse, since she does not yet desire it. In such a situation, the woman is concerned that the child will reveal the behavior of the adult, and she won't come to sin. That's what I've got for us tonight. Let's check a few comments or questions. Bill, I'm suddenly reminded of a story from one of Alexander Dumas' books, right? The Three Musketeers. He's the writer of, but maybe it's another book. But for the life of me, I can't remember which book. Of a certain lecher who repented of his evil ways and went to join a monastery, but he was terrified he'd fall off the wagon. So the kindly old abbot had a great bell installed in the man's cell and told him to ring it whenever he felt the temptation of lust. and all the other monks would immediately rise and pray for him. And so he did. And the bell had to be replaced every few months from how often it was sounded. I'm not familiar with that story. That's good. Sharon, and yet they pursued Rabbi Meir's amazing wife Berurah to prove that she was corruptible, at least according to rabbinic writing. Yeah, that whole kind of Othello setup, right? I mean, okay, it's Satan's job to entrap and create temptation. Why would any of us, go out of our way to test someone to see whether they're susceptible to temptation or not? That definitely sounds like a bad plan to me. It was a bad plan for Othello. It was a bad plan for Rabbi Meir or his students. I remember the story that you're talking about. I can't remember what tractate it's in. But yeah, not a good idea. Not a good plan. Thanks for the reminder. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Pacific, for our siyum on tractate Kiddushin and to open our next tractate, Bava Kama.